Good evening. Welcome to the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for October 2nd, 2019. This meeting is being audio and video recorded per the open meeting laws of the state of Massachusetts. Tonight at 7 o'clock, we have 17 Lawrence Street, the Preserve at Abbeville and Abbeville Commons. The applicant has asked for a continuation of that hearing until October 16th at 7 o'clock. Could I have a motion to continue the public hearing till October 16th at 7 o'clock?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We got a few seconds here. At 7:15, we will be continuing 144 Seekonk Street, Lakeland Hills, the comprehensive permit. At this time, I'd like to welcome Josie Gordahi. Is that pronounced right? Yes. Josie's our new associate member. She comes to us. She lives on Seekonk Street. She is a registered nurse. Welcome aboard. Anything else, Josie, you'd like to add, or?
There's nothing else.
Okay. So, welcome aboard. Is the folks at Ron, are the folks out there at Lakeland Hills, are they out there? Send them in. Tell them to come on in. They're up. Tell them to come on up.
I saw Travis out there.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
We don't. Yes.
I know we originally had 194 Main Street on for the 16th.
We did.
Is it still on? for the
Still on.
16th?
Yeah, we're gonna have to do some
Be a
maneuvering.
Long meeting, okay.
Yes, it's gonna be a long night.
And I noticed we originally had a meeting on the 30th of October, which now it does not show.
Correct. On the 30th of October?
Yes. Amy originally had down that we were going to have a meeting on the 30th of October.
I have that down where.
It was on the thing that said next meetings. It's okay, this is not today's. This was like last meeting.
Oh, then it was probably there because I was just going every other, but that wasn't a first or
Yeah.
a third.
Oh, okay.
We may have to do one on the 23rd. Is everybody around on the 23rd of October, as far as they know,
Yes.
for any meeting?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And how about the 30th of October? Is everybody around on the 30th of October, as far as they know?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Okay.
I had down there was a
We may
meeting.
need to add a second meeting, just due to the number of meetings we have.
I would have suggested we move Abbeville to one of those dates.
That's where we're contemplating. Okay. Welcome. It's 7:15. We are going to continue the public hearing for 144 Seekonk Street. Welcome. How are you? Tonight, we are going to discuss the civil engineering review. We're going to talk about traffic. We have our two traffic study folks here. We have to approve a hydrogeological peer reviewer, which we'll do later on this evening, for housekeeping. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. O'Hart and his team. Welcome again this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Christopher Agostino, counsel for Lakeland Hills. We last met about a month ago, and we had some preliminary discussion about the civil engineering review for what was our second iteration of plans that's up on the screen here. And when we left that meeting, the intent was for the applicant to go back up on site and conduct additional soil testing, and then potentially produce a further revised plan set that incorporated a lot of the comments that we've received to date, both generally and at the last hearing with respect to engineering constraints on the site and general design issues, roadway layout, configuration of houses, and some of the other comments. Unfortunately, as some of us may know, in the interim, we took a little bit of a detour and had a hearing before the Conservation Commission last night, following up on a report that was issued by Patrick Garner that the end result is it had the effect of delaying our soil testing. We deferred our soil testing until we were able to at least appear before the Conservation Commission and discuss what their concerns were. So we had scheduled that for right after the hearing last week, which is obviously this week. So we are out there this week conducting extensive soil testing on site that will give us the data we need to respond to Tetra Tech's initial civil review and hopefully produce a further evolved plan set in the coming weeks. We can discuss the scheduling for that in a little bit more detail. But tonight, we are prepared to present on traffic. We have our traffic engineer here. We submitted to the board at the last hearing, or shortly after the last hearing, our traffic report. And that has since been peer reviewed. I believe the board's traffic expert is here to present his initial findings with respect to our report. But with that, I think the intent for tonight is to discuss the traffic report and traffic-related issues. So if that's okay with the board, unless you have any other questions, I'm going to turn it over to our traffic engineer, who's just going to give an initial summary of the findings that were written down in our traffic report that was submitted to the board. And then from there, I suppose we could hear from the board's traffic engineer and then go from there.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Philip Cherry. I'm traffic engineer with WSP. And as Chris mentioned, we performed a traffic study for this site. Briefly, that entailed looking at the existing site conditions, including traffic volumes. We also looked at site-related traffic, that is traffic that would be generated by the proposed site and how that would be distributed. We looked at how that proposed traffic would impact intersection operations at the proposed driveway site. We also evaluated stopping site and intersection site distance. And then actually in the last 48 hours, we've looked at safety data near that site based on our receipt of the initial peer review comments. So in a little more depth, Seekonk Street is a 2-lane urban minor arterial per the Mass DOT classification. Has a posted speed limit of 35 miles per hour. Our data found that, however, the prevailing or 85th percentile speeds were 40 miles per hour southbound, 41 miles per hour northbound, so 5 to 6 miles per hour higher than the posted speed. We collected traffic data at the proposed driveway site. That data was collected in November and December of 2016. However, we have increased those volumes in a number of ways, which I will touch on. 3,100 total daily vehicles were observed, 1,700 of which were going northbound, 1,400 of which approximately were going southbound. Based on that count data, the AM peak hour was observed to be 7 to 8 a.m., in which 420 vehicles were counted. 340 of those were going north, 80 going south. The PM peak hour was observed to be 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. Approximately 300 vehicles counted, 210 going south, 90 going north. For the purposes of our, thank you, for the purposes of the project and sort of future distributions and analysis, based on the data, we determined that approximately 75% of volumes, 75% of vehicles exiting that site would be going north, 25% would be going south towards Main Street. Volumes that we collected were increased by 5% for the fact that these volumes were collected in November, December. Those are typically lower volume months on average, and so you increase those volumes to sort of match the average overall annual volume. Those volumes were again increased from the 2016 value by 1% per year to account for background growth. And then I'll also touch on a little bit later, in the last 48 hours, we've done some additional volume increases for sort of a stress test based on some additional potential traffic increases. We also looked at multimodal data. There is no sidewalk right now on Seekonk Street, so pedestrian counts weren't considered. However, we did count 24 cyclists during the peak day. We counted 14 going south, 10 going north, and there's no nearby bus stop. So as far as transit infrastructure, I think the nearest major transit center would be the commuter rail station here, which would be over a 1.5 mile walk from that location. As mentioned, we did look at safety data in the last 48 hours based on your peer reviewers' comments. We looked about a 1/4 mile in each direction from the proposed driveway site along Seekonk Street and used the Mass DOT crash data portal to find and identify those crashes. We found 5 crashes in the last 5 years in that 1/2 mile segment. 4 of those crashes were roughly at the intersection of Cleveland Street, and one was located a couple hundred feet south of Fruit Street. Only one of those crashes resulted in an injury, and that injury was non-fatal. And only one of those 5 crashes actually occurred with another motor vehicle. The other 4 were either with an embankment, an animal, or a tree. From that crash data, you can actually determine what's called a segment crash rate, which looks at how many cars are going by that site, how long you've looked at that site, and you can determine and compare that rate to other similar types of road facilities in Massachusetts. And based on that analysis, this segment crash rate for that half-mile area, we determined to be less than half of that for a comparable urban minor arterial in Massachusetts. So ours was 1.68 crashes per million vehicle miles traveled, and the comparative average for that similar classification is 3.80, so roughly 40-ish%. Moving on, we also looked at site-related traffic, and that's based on using a standard industry reference, which is the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation manual. We used the 10th edition of that manual and used Associated Land Use Code 210, which is for single-use, it's the appropriate land use code, single-use attached housing. From that, we developed, or from that manual, based on the 96 units that were there, we determined that there would be 906 daily trips generated by this development. In the AM peak hour, there would be 73 trips, 18 of which would be entering, 55 of which would be exiting the site, and in the PM peak hour there would be 98 trips, 36 of which would be exiting the site, and 62 of which would be entering the site. From that data, you can loosely look at, you don't know exactly where every car is going to go, but Seekonk Street sort of dead ends at the north and south, dead ends to the south at Main Street, as you know, to the north at Massachusetts State Route 27, which is signalized. Based on the trip distribution, which we said earlier is 75% to the north, approximately 25 to the south, you basically end up with about 40 more vehicles, 40 to 45, going north towards State Route 27 in the morning, and another 45 coming back from that state route in the evening. And that equates to about 1 additional vehicle every 80 to 85 seconds. So if you were sitting on the side of the road, that's the frequency at which an additional vehicle would be added to the existing traffic stream. Because we found more traffic going north than south, the number of trips added to Main Street would be less. We found about 15 additional trips headed south in the AM and sort of coming back up from Main Street in the PM. We took this data then and we looked at the potential intersection operations at the driveway sites. We used a very commonly used traffic software to evaluate this based on the existing count data that had been grown, as well as the projected trip generation, and looked at that. And there's what's called level of service, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We looked at that in 2026, which is 7 years from now, which is an industry standard per MassDOT to project 7 years ahead. And based on that 7-year projection, both of the levels of service were acceptable. The AM was projected to be a level of service B at the driveway, and the PM was projected to be a level of service A at that driveway. Based on the peer review comments, we did look at a bit of sort of a stress test, if you will. We did not increase the trip generation from the site any further, but we did increase the volumes on Seekonk Street, the 2026 volumes, by another 10% to account for additional development and growth. And even with that increase, we found that the level of service would still be within the level of service B range for that site. That was something we did in the last 48 hours, but we can add that to our report as needed. We also looked at stopping site and intersection site distance. And stopping site distance is required. It's if you're driving along the roadway, something enters the road, you need a certain amount of time to stop before you hit that. You can stop safely. For the vehicle traveling at at 40 miles per hour, which is 5 miles above the posted speed limit. 305 feet of sight distance is required. If you're coming from the north going southbound, we found that there's plenty of sight distance. There's 400 plus feet of sight distance coming from the north. Coming from the south, however, we found that essentially the sight distance happens to basically be right at that 305 foot threshold. And because the 85th percentile of traffic was actually going 41 miles an hour, that actually is slightly more than the 305. We found there was some shrubbery that was sort of hanging over into the public right-of-way. Trimming that shrubbery would allow you to maintain that necessary sight distance for the stopping sight distance. So you wouldn't have to cut the tree down. It's just maintaining this tree shrubbery at a reasonable distance. And then we also looked at intersection sight distance. And intersection sight distance is if you're turning from the driveway, do you have clear sight triangles to the left and the right? And for a 40-mile-an-hour facility, the required intersection sight distance is 445 feet. Intersection sight distance is desirable or recommended. It is not required. To the north, there was 270 feet available, and then it was blocked by trees that we found were approximately 60 to 150 feet from the driveway. From the south, there was less distance, but the trees were much closer, and there was fewer trees that would need to be removed. We found that the intersection sight distance was actually less than 100 feet looking to the south. So that was the sight distance evaluation, and that was the extent of the traffic study. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. We can obviously turn it over to the board's traffic peer review engineer, but I just, to elaborate a bit on what Philip was describing regarding the adjustment or the stress test to the traffic count that was done back in 2016, the idea was that because one of the peer review comments was it was over 2 years old, we adjusted that. You know, it already takes, the study already takes into account plan development, future development under build conditions is what it's referred to, or 7 years out. But we further added additional potential traffic on top of that to account for anything else that may have been developed in the interim. We're sort of under unique circumstances here where our application was filed several years ago but was stayed while other applications were pending before this board. So we thought that the adjustment for additional traffic over and above what was originally calculated would be appropriate to try to address any concerns in that regard rather than going out and doing another full-scale count. And again, it reveals that the level of service changes aren't noticeable. So the other aspect or the other point that was mentioned, and we'll probably hear more about it, I know this board's very, very familiar, having dealt with other projects with respect to intersection sight distance and stopping sight distance. We mentioned that intersection sight distance is within tolerances. The stopping sight distance in one direction is essentially right at where you would want to see it under existing conditions at the 85th percentile, with some shrubbery that is extending out into the public way. So if you're maintaining the public way, that shrubbery shouldn't be an issue. And we can look further into that depending on what the board peer review expert wants to see to confirm that stopping sight distance in that direction is appropriate. So with those two issues clarified, we also did have, as far as the traffic count and stopping sight distance, the other element that we've consulted with Philip on, in a general sense, is the functionality of the interior roadway network and also the dead-end roadway or the boulevard-style roadway. And we've already had significant discussion and feedback with this board. We've received a letter from the fire chief. The board's peer review engineer pointed out a few aspects of that roadway that could be improved or changed. So we definitely anticipate that our next plan set is going to show an evolution of that design, taking into account all of those comments, including some advice and comments that Philip and his team had as well. Some of those were mentioned in this report, but we'll continue to elaborate on those. So that was another aspect of Philip's review. And as you know, the plan evolves, there was also obviously comments about turning radiuses and those things that, to the extent some of those come into question, and it goes beyond what Travis and his team at Andrews might look at, we can also call our traffic engineer back to comment on those types of issues. So with that, I can turn it back over to the chairman, and we can hear from the board's expert and go from there.
Great. I think we'll hold off on questions till we hear from our peer reviewer. Kim, you ready?
I'm ready.
Come on up. Thank you, Mr. Agostino.
Would you prefer I stand and present, or?
Wherever you feel comfortable.
Okay, miking is okay if I stand here?
It's comfortable, and just grab a mic.
Grab a
and-
mic.
Thank you. Okay, good evening. My name is Kim Hazavardian. I'm a traffic engineer with TEP LLC. Most of you are not familiar with me, so I'll give the snapshot. I've been doing this since 1981. Hold several degrees in civil/transportation engineering. I'm a registered professional engineer in Massachusetts and 3 other states, and I'm a certified professional traffic operations engineer. I won't go over what was in the study itself in much detail because the applicant did that, but I'll mostly talk about comments. The traffic study did look at existing 2019 existing and build conditions with and without the project, and 2026 no build and build conditions. Future growth without the project, that's a no build condition. The build condition adds the project's traffic. The traffic study did not present the usual pictorial networks that make it easier for a reader to understand what's going on at any particular point in time. It makes it easier for the reader to compare the various conditions. And I comment that the traffic study should include those networks. The traffic study analyzes the Seekonk Street proposed driveway intersection. That's the only intersection that it analyzes. And my comment is that the study area should be expanded to include the nearest intersections of substance, namely Seekonk Street, Cleveland Street to the north, and Seekonk Street, Fruit Street to the south. In addition, some traffic may use intersections that already experience delays, such as Main Street, Seekonk Street, and Route 27 and South Street. And I would suggest that WSP confer with town staff about those intersections. The traffic volumes, as already discussed, are greater than 2 years old, and the Massachusetts Department of Transportation Traffic Impact Assessment Guidelines suggest that these data are not deemed current unless a reviewing authority accepts the data. Now, getting a new ATR costs a matter of several $100s, so it wouldn't be very time or labor intensive to update those counts. If the counts are updated, we suggest that we do it for 48 hours, and that we don't look at anomalous periods, not a holiday week or a week with a school vacation. The ATR, automatic traffic recorder, obtains speed data on Seekonk Street near the site, and as discussed, northbound 85th percentile speed was 40 miles an hour. That's a speed exceeded by 15% of the traffic. Only 15% is going faster than that. And southbound 85th percentile was 41 miles per hour. The speed limit is 35. And if the data are recollected, I would assume that new speed data would be included. Regarding traffic study site distances, the traffic study talks about both stopping site distance and intersection site distance. And I'll give my own take on both of those. At an intersection, you measure site distances one way, and that would be to make sure that a vehicle waiting to exit the side street has enough distance to pull out and judge without a vehicle surprising them from the main road. Let me explain it a little bit differently. There are two components in that one measurement. One is exiting sight distance, and the other is approaching sight distance. For exiting sight distance, you would measure a sight line from a point up to 14.5 feet back from the edge of traveled way on the proposed road. And you would sight onto Seekonk Street to see how far away a vehicle comes into view. You do the reciprocal measurement, the approaching sight distance. You'd have a driver's eye on Seekonk Street observing the traffic coming out from the side street into Seekonk Street and get a measurement that way. That's your approaching sight distance. And you take the shorter of those two, and that's your sight distance that's available. And the reason for that is you want to make sure that someone driving on Seekonk Street has enough distance to do what that vehicle needs to do. And you also want to make sure that a vehicle exiting the side street can see that vehicle approaching, so it's not pulling out when that vehicle approaching doesn't have enough time to do what it needs to do. And you compare two different criteria to that available sight distance. Those two criteria are stopping sight distance and intersection sight distance, and both of those are described in a policy on geometric design for highways and streets published by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. Now, if an intersection meets stopping sight distance, a vehicle can exit from the side street, and a vehicle on the major street, Seekonk Street, will have time to perceive, react, and stop if necessary to avoid a collision. That's if stopping sight distance is provided. That is a pretty important thing to apply. Intersection sight distance allows a vehicle to exit from the side street in such a manner that the vehicle on the major street, Seekonk Street, will only have to do limited adjustment to its speed to avoid the vehicle turning out. Stopping sight distance is paramount importance. Intersection sight distance is something you strive to do. The way the traffic study presented sight distances, and this is in my table 1, to the north, the smallest number reference for existing sight distance is 270 feet. That compares with AASHTO stopping sight distance for the 85th percentile speed of 305 feet. The 85th percentile speed is 40 miles an hour. Stopping sight distance for 40 miles an hour is 305 feet. The lowest sight distance measured in the traffic study is 270 feet for that direction. The intersection sight distance for the 85th percentile speed is 445 feet. Looking to and from the south, in other words, looking to the left out of the proposed street or road, the 85th percentile speed is 41 miles an hour. The existing sight distance, the lowest number that's listed in the traffic study, is 40 feet, which is much less than the stopping sight distance for the 85th percentile speed of 312 feet, and the intersection sight distance for the 85th percentile speed of 451 feet. So in a nutshell, the applicant should resolve all of that, confirm what sight distances are actually available in terms of the way I presented them, and demonstrate using plans or profiles that the sight distance either exists or can be met through clearing or whatever. And if the clearing happens to be across other people's land, i.e. not in the public right-of-way, then a sight distance easement or a view easement might be applicable. Crash history, traffic study accidents. The traffic study should include crash history and rate analysis done in the standard Mass DOT manner, which the applicant's traffic engineer described, and include Seekonk Street at least between and including the intersection with Cleveland Street to the north and Fruit Street to the south. Traffic study, treatment of pedestrians, bicycle, and transit. The traffic study should present existing pedestrians bicycles and transit considerations in the site and in the area, and that is pulled from the Mass DOT traffic study guidelines. The vehicle trips, I reviewed the vehicle trips, and my numbers agreed in the peak hours. My daily number was slightly higher, but wouldn't affect the findings, which are calculated on the basis of peak hour conditions. Trip distribution, the traffic study assumed that 75% of the trips would be to and from the north and 25% to and from the south, and that is consistent with the counted volumes. If a recount is done, it should be checked again. Capacity analysis, the traffic study presented capacity analysis, including levels in service and delays, limited to the Seekonk Street proposed driveway intersection. And the appendix also includes queuing. And the presented level of service are high with low delays and short queues. The traffic study should be expanded to present level of service, delays, and queues at the other two intersections I mentioned. Now let's talk about roadway and roundabout design. The site has the roadway that comes in a little over 1,100 feet. Then there's a roundabout. Then there's a loop road. And there's a dead-end stub off of the loop road that serves lots, units, these units here, including 15, 16, 17, 18. We have, for this portion, the roadway portion between Seekonk Street and the roundabout, what would be a pure single means of access. It's been treated as a boulevard, though, to provide a little bit of additional redundancy and safety. In other words, if one barrel of the boulevard is blocked, then the other barrel of the boulevard might hopefully still be available. The Norfolk subdivision rules and regulations require that subdivisions having 25 or more lots shall have at least 2 points of access to an existing through street separated by a minimum distance of 350 feet, or shall have 2 separate passable access routes via existing primary streets to an existing through street where the points of access are. Bottom line is you're talking about 2 access routes. This project has 96,000 units on 70 lots, and there's 1 access point on Seekonk Street. The applicant should confirm that an emergency access remote from the proposed roadway is not available or practicable, and if not, should consider additional safety mitigation measures, maybe improving upon or refining the boulevard that they've already put in place. And why is that? Safety risk increases the longer that single means of access is and the more development it serves. The longer the access, the more length for something to go wrong. The more length for people to have accidents that block the road, the more length for trees to fall across the road, whatever. The larger the development, the more chance of incidents that require emergency response. Now, some detailed comments on the internal roadway network. The applicant should provide a swept path analysis and plan using turning templates or auto-turn software to demonstrate that Norfolk's emergency vehicles and other anticipated large vehicles can navigate through the site. In other words, are people going to be able to make, or are vehicles going to be able to make the turns and use a roundabout? The applicant should consider, before I get to that little stub driveway, the applicant should consider making that median traversable at points. And it looks like there are some points where it is traversable now. And why do I say that? If you have something blocking one barrel of the boulevard, an emergency vehicle needs a way of getting around or through that median to get to the other side to bypass whatever's blocking one barrel of the boulevard. The stub driveway by units 16 and 17, the applicant should consider if practicable, a hammerhead turnaround to enable vehicles, including emergency vehicles, to turn around more easily, rather than coming to a dead end and having to deal with just a simple, sharp, stark dead end. The applicant should demonstrate that the anticipated range of vehicles can appropriately make turning movements at the Seekonk Street proposed road intersection. And that means things like turning radii and throat widths. And the applicant should look at basically any parking spaces or backing along the road. Right here near the community mailbox, there are some perpendicular parking spaces, and there are some dwelling units near the roundabout. And if vehicles need to back out, and they do, can they back out without hitting a median? And it looks like there are openings now. And can they make all the movements they need to do? Or they make sure they're not blocked in or have a tough time getting in and out. And the applicant should provide a stop sign on the proposed road approach to Seekonk Street and explain how future residents in the area will get around on foot in terms of sidewalks on the site and anything located along Seekonk Street or side streets within about a mile of the site. So that concludes my comments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions from the board.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, well.
Questions? I guess I'm going to start with one. I know you said for them to update the data. Right now, on Seekonk Street, the gas company is putting in a gas line, which is obviously the road is closed, I think, most of the weekdays. So how would they be able to, they wouldn't be able to perform this at this current time?
Well, I almost couldn't get out to do my field work. Everything was closed down. I had to talk to someone to get through. I guess my question is, does anyone know how much longer that's going to last?
End of November.
Yeah,
End of November.
yeah.
Okay, well, that construction work is going to affect everything in terms of traffic volumes,
Yes.
including at the intersections we talked about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. No solution yet, huh?
No solution.
Okay. You don't know anybody at the gas company, huh?
No, I'm from the Lawrence area, so I don't, you know.
Just asking, you never know, right? All right.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly on that point, I'd like to hear from the board's consultant, understanding that this is the reviewing authority, and the MassDOT guidelines say within 2 years. If we've shown that we could increase it by 10% and still be within tolerances as far as level of service, did you notice anything that would concern you as far as level of service at surrounding intersections that would be sensitive to a 2-year delay?
Well, when I was out there, the surrounding intersections were affected by the gas company's work, so I couldn't see how they normally operated. I guess my question is, an increase was pumped into there at a rate of 1% per year originally, right, to get from 2016 to 2019. And then on top of that, another 10% increase went in to reflect additional background traffic growth. Maybe if you could present documentation that shows how that compares with other relevant locations and also factors in the other developments going in around town, because I understand there are several others going in, and make sure it covers that, and let me review it.
Just, was there any intersection that was F level, D level, that was of critical concern? Because I think when we stressed it, adding 10%, I think we're still at B. And I think, Phil, it's a great suggestion to, look at what other sites have experienced over those 2 years. Is there any intersection that is of critical concern that this might be something that we'd want to really look at, just because I'm trying to identify the major issues? So,
Well, the two substantial intersections near the site are Cleveland and Fruit along Seekonk. The other intersections are farther away that are mentioned in my comments, and I suggested that the applicant talk with town staff to see what their take is on this for those other intersections.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just weigh in on that, too.
Sure.
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, is that what the traffic study looked at for level of service was just its own intersection. It didn't look at level of service for the off-site intersections?
Different issue. You were talking, I think, we're talking about stopping, like how long you wait at an intersection.
Right.
So we did do several other intersections. I think he did mention, and actually this is a point I wanted to clarify as well. With respect to stopping site distance and intersection site distance, were you suggesting at one point that you wanted us to look at other intersections near the site?
No.
No, okay. So is that that wasn't it
I
either?
think you're confusing two concepts. I think there's level of service, which looks at intersections off-site, which would be, Fruit Street, Cleveland Street, and Seccong.
Correct.
And then site distance is a separate concept. And so my question was only on level of service for off-site intersections. And because that was the question you asked, was there any F intersections or bad
We
intersections?
definitely looked at other intersections.
We only looked at the driveway.
We only did the driveway. So is that why we didn't do the pictorial network?
We only looked at the driveway for the traffic study only evaluated the driveway for the intersection level of service. In my comments earlier, I commented how many vehicles generated by the site would likely be going north towards State Route 27 or south towards Main Street. And then the intersection and stopping site distance was performed at the driveway site, which would be typically wouldn't need to perform that at other locations.
Right. So I think Kim's recommendation tonight in his report was that you look at the level of service for those, at least the two intersections, Fruit Street and Cleveland Street, and then consult with town staff, town planner, to see if it's warranted to look at the Main Street intersection. We could hear from folks in the audience or you guys as to what traffic's like in that area. Obviously, I don't know. But that was, I think, the issue that was raised in Kim's report.
I concur.
Okay.
One of the mentioned intersections is in Medfield. The
That's
one-
27.
That's 27, yeah.
And how bad is that in the morning?
Well, there is a backup at the light when people go to work. If you're going to Boston or if you're going up to Route 109, there's a standing traffic at the light as the light processes traffic.
How far back does it go?
It could be,
Quarter or a half mile, easy.
yeah, especially during rush hour.
Yeah, every morning. Yeah,
So Kim, does that,
during that peak time.
It's assumed it would add to that.
knowing it's a quarter to half mile queue, is that something that?
Yeah, I was actually, and I apologize, I was mistaken. I thought we had looked at level of service at other intersections nearby, which is why I was confused by that comment. I thought I saw something about other intersections, so I don't think it would be inappropriate to do some basic analysis of those two closest intersections.
Okay.
So we could probably gather more information on that in response to your peer review report.
And the way I've dealt with intersections beyond the two closer substantial intersections is to project out, like Phil did for those two intersections, project out what would be added to those more remote intersections where there's already a queuing problem, and that would help in conference with the town to figure out what more might be done.
Right. The other benefit we have is that, and again, the town knows you've had a lot of projects recently. There have been a lot of traffic studies that have been done recently, so we could probably consult with some of the data from those projects and see if that gives us any additional insight to some of these issues.
Sure.
So for an action item on that issue alone, I think it makes sense that the applicant provide the additional intersection level of service, and then also that Kim maybe speaks to Phil offline and maybe with Rich to determine how to evaluate the other intersections, if it includes some kind of analysis or actually doing a full level of service.
I would concur.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you.
Question. Go ahead, Don.
I'm just a little confused between, on the WSP report, it says that the approaching the site driveway from the south along Seccong Street, SSD is clear at 305 feet. Yet I'm looking at your thing, and it says from the south, existing site distance is 40 feet. And I'm a little confused that the differential is significant there.
Either of you elaborate on that?
I am thinking that they were measured, the two measurements were done in different ways, and And if they're checked following the method I described, there'll be only one distance that would be used for comparison with ISD and SSD. It may not be 40 feet. It could be some other number.
Amy, can you bring up Kim's report? And I know you made some corrections to your data, so maybe we can, I think that's correct, aren't I?
Yeah.
With regard to the SSD and ISD? So maybe we can talk about that.
Right, I'm going to, Phil will comment on that briefly. I think, after seeing the peer review
Table one.
report, we are going to put this particular,
There, right.
we are going to put stopping sight distance on a plan so that you can see how the triangle plays out and the board can visualize it.
Okay.
Since we've identified a discrepancy there, but I'll let Phil speak to that as far as the discrepancy in this table relative to what the narrative says in their report.
That's what you were asking, Don, correct? Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Phil.
So again, approaching from the north, going south, we found there was plenty of sight distance, 400 feet plus. Coming from the south, if you were looking toward the driveway, we found, just ironically, that there happened to be right at that 300 to 305 foot threshold. We placed a cone out where a small object or anything on the roadway would be, and we could see that object right at 300 to 305 feet in that range. If you needed to go any further, there was some shrubbery that was in the way from there. The intersection sight distance we were measuring being at the driveway looking back and set back 14 and a half feet, as the reviewer mentioned, and that was where that more, obviously very different 40-foot value was viewed if you're a driver set back from that. Again, the stopping sight distance is required, and the intersection sight distance is desirable or recommended per the reference text that the reviewer mentioned.
So from a layman's perspective, from the south, you're saying there is enough, which is 302 feet, to see if all of a sudden a car pulled out onto Seekonk from the driveway. But from a general, not stopping sight distance, but from a general, whatever the other term is, viewing sight distance, or that as you're coming northbound on Seekonk Street, that if a vehicle was 14 and a half feet back, all right, then that vehicle could not see me. Is that correct?
That is the principle of the two. The stopping sight distance is key because you obviously want to be able to stop in the road if something jumps out there. The intersection sight distance, that 14 and a half feet, is based on sort of where the driver's sitting, the fact that you have a hood in your car and you're set back a little bit. So yes, you would have more limited sight distance pulling out there. There is often an interplay between the two, and there's a reason. Part of the reason that it's not required is that, in theory, you could inch your car out. I think we've all been on a driveway where you can't quite see, and so you maybe pull out a little bit further, and then you have that distance. But if someone was coming, they could see you doing that. So,
Would it be possible to, I know we did something similar at 25 Rockwood. Can you show, to me, 40 feet, you can't see anything. And it doesn't matter how much stopping sight distance the car has in the other direction. Because if you can only see 40 feet, and that car's 40 feet away, and you start pulling out, you might not see him. So I think, Chris, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Just
the
show a plan.
triangles. Yep, the sight triangles for stopping sight distance. And we had intended to do some additional basic surveying in that area to confirm these as well, since a discrepancy has been identified, or at least a question as to whether or not we've achieved that in our design. So definitely we'll articulate that, and you'll have plans that you can see exactly how we measured it, and then your peer reviewer can comment on whether or not that was the proper methodology.
Yeah, that's good. He asked the question. The questions have been asked.
Kim, should we be, I know you talk about the, should present existing and future pedestrian, bicycle, and transit considerations. Obviously, this is a mile and a half from the train, and one of our concerns is, obviously, we expect people to be walking from this site. Do you have any thoughts on that as to what they, I mean, we're looking at there may have to be a possible sidewalk installed to get them to the nearest sidewalk, which I think would be down on Cleveland Street, close to Rockwood Road, where another 40B is going in called the Enclave, or they'd have to do a sidewalk going to Boardman Street, which I think has a sidewalk. I think Boardman has no sidewalks at all?
Only from the school down.
From the school down. Okay. So is there,
Down
what
to
was your
East-
thoughts on that? I mean, obviously, we can't have people walking, probably not walking on Seekonk Street to the train.
My thought would be to flesh out what the town has in mind for possible alternatives and plans. If the town is thinking about, first of all, where's the existing transit? Where are the existing sidewalks? Does the town have any plans for putting in more links of sidewalks here and there? Are there developers putting in links of sidewalks here and there? And then that leaves gaps. Where are the gaps? And how practicable is it to fill in the gaps? Some gaps might be practicable to fill in, some might not. Okay, so start with basically what's available for sidewalks from other sources. What are the gaps? And what's practicable to fill in as far as the gaps go.
Dan, do you have some?
Yeah, I had a couple comments. So I'm actually, I'd like to, can you switch to my computer if I plug this in?
Yes.
Okay.
You have to change the input on
Yeah, it's just different input, right?
Oh, it's just the input?
Yeah.
Oh.
on the projector.
No, it's not anything.
Show them something too.
Well, like, something I do. Not that one.
Was that you, Chris? I thought I saw you up there in the theater.
Beach retreat.
They're like television.
The big bucks get.
They look like Survivor or something. Is it labeled? Is the monitor labeled? Is the?
Chris again on vacation.
It's got to be computer one.
There it is. That's it.
He's there.
That's me, yeah. Okay. All right, so these concepts of sight distances, intersection sight distance, stopping sight distance, I find this very dense and confusing, and I've had to actually deal with these issues a lot lately in my practice. We've got several projects with questionable sight distances, and so I've had to, as Sean can attest because he's worked with me on a couple other projects, I've had to get up to speed and understand this myself. So what we have here is there's no rules, right? There's no regulation. There's no state or federal regulation. What we have is AASHTO, which is the acronym for the Association of State and
The American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials.
Thank
It
you.
used to just be ASHO. They added the transportation later to be multimodal.
Okay, so this is what it looks like. This is the actual manual, right? So then,
Very updated.
There's a 2011.
Okay.
Oh, there is.
But this part's about the same.
It hasn't changed.
I lost it here. Here, let me just try to get back to where I was.
Is it on the PC or is it internet?
So this paragraph explains what we're dealing with. So there's two different values. There's intersection sight distance value and stopping sight distance value. So stopping sight distance is measured within the right-of-way. It's one point in the right-of-way to another point in the right-of-way. Intersection sight distance is measured from a point 14 and a half feet back from the traveled way to a point in the right-of-way. So what the AASHTO manual says is that you absolutely need to have stopping sight distance. That's our recommendation. But as I said, it's not a regulation, it's not a rule with any force of law. It's basically an industry standard. Stopping sight distance is mandatory. They've shown that they have stopping sight distance in both directions, and Kim has said he's comfortable with their measurements. The question here is intersection sight distance. It was measured appropriately from 14 and a half feet back. That is the right way to do it. Sometimes we have engineers come in and fudge it and say 10 feet back or 5 feet back. So they did this the right way. The problem is that they're saying they have 40 feet of sight distance in one direction, 270 feet in another direction, because it's obscured by trees and shrubbery. Now, there is two levels of rules within intersection sight distance. What AASHTO says is that if you have intersection sight distance that's equal to what the available stopping sight distance would be, in this case 305 feet, then that's adequate. And that's in this paragraph. So it's right here. If the available sight distance is at least equal to the appropriate stopping sight distance for the major road, then drivers having sufficient sight distance to anticipate and avoid collisions. However, in some cases, this may require vehicles to make maneuvers to avoid a collision. And then it says, to enhance traffic operations, intersection sight distances that exceed stopping sight distances are desirable. So we have within AASHTO two values. We have the stopping sight distance and the desirable intersection sight distance. So to be clear, and Kim is going to correct me if I'm misstating something, there is intersection sight distance which uses the SST value, but they don't show that here. At least that's what they're telling us today, that they're at 40, not the 305. And so I think that is a deficiency for intersection sight distance. And the way I read this and the way this has been applied in the courts is that that isn't ideal. That's actually required under AASHTO. AASHTO is saying you have to have at least SSD for ISD. Does that make sense? You guys? Okay.
Sure.
So I think that's one of the big issues with this traffic study, is that there is this deficiency looking north and looking south. And one of the questions I had, and Kim and I discussed this last week, was what would it take to get to 305? So you're at 270 in one direction, 40 in another, and your report said there's trees and shrubs, I think, in both directions, and if you could somehow clear those trees and shrubs, maybe you can get to the 305. But can you elaborate as to where those trees and shrubs are? Are they within the right-of-way of Seekonk Street, in which case we might be able to clear them and not have a private property issue? Or are they on private property, in which case that might be more problematic?
So we received the comments, and we already discussed doing some additional survey work down in that area to present the plan to the board so you can see exactly where the obstruction is located, and then survey to determine whether or not it's in the layout of the road. So these are answers that we will provide. I am curious as to the authority that would require you to have intersection sight distance at least as long as stopping sight distance as a mandatory compulsory requirement, because I've always understood the intersection sight distance, as you initially indicated, to be more of a convenience factor in the way that Philip described. So I think Dan and I can maybe debate that later, but I'd just like to understand what the authority is to just. Everybody at home get that?
There may be some room for people to disagree on this, and I don't think it's crystal clear myself. So I read this as saying you need to have SSD at your intersection point. Now, maybe other people can...
I'm not going to contradict you. I'm going to be stricter than you. Okay, if you look here, says, if the available sight distance for an entering or crossing vehicle is at least equal to the appropriate stopping sight distance for the major road, then drivers have sufficient sight distance to anticipate and avoid collisions. So dissecting that, if the available sight distance for the entering or crossing vehicle, in other words, if you're in a vehicle off to the side, your eye is set back 14.5 feet from the edge of traveled way, the edge of Seekonk Street traveled way, you need to be able to see a vehicle approaching you on Seekonk Street when that vehicle is at least stopping sight distance away. All right, so it has to be both ways. A vehicle coming along Seekonk Street needs to, let's say the stopping sight distance you need to have is 305 feet. That vehicle approaching on Seekonk Street needs to be able to see a vehicle pulling out from the side street when it's at least 305 feet away. The vehicle waiting on the driveway needs to be able to see that approaching vehicle a vehicle on Seekonk Street from 305 feet away. If it is hypothetically only 40 feet that vehicle on the side street can see, then that vehicle theoretically could pull out unknowingly when that vehicle on the major street only has 40 feet to stop. So that SSD criteria needs to be applied in both directions, including from that driver's eye 14.5 feet back from edge of traveled way. Does that clarify or confuse?
No, that
Clarify.
says it better.
Good.
Yeah. So I think one of the action items that I took away from Kim's report is we need to see a plan showing the site triangles, which I think you mentioned. And just to be clear, I think what we're looking for are probably 4 plans. So it's stopping sight distance, 1 in each direction, and then intersection sight distance, 1 in each direction. But you're going to do some more survey work, so that should happen first, and then you
Yep.
can give us...
This is on our radar, so
Yep.
we do plan to respond to the comments that we received, and that's the type of response we'll propose.
Good.
Just before we leave off of this, I want to make sure we're covering all the action items. The swept path analysis, is that something you've already done, Chris, or is that in the works?
What did you ask, Mike? Dan?
The swept path analysis, and this is a fire code requirement, actually. It's a state fire code that all corners and intersections have to be capable of receiving, the largest fire truck in the town. We've dealt with this in other projects.
Yeah, so ultimately, we'll show that on any revised plans. I mean, we looked at it at the intersection of Seekonk, but we're also going to look at it internally. Based on the board's comments at the last meeting, some of these straight sections of road weren't desirable. We're going to reevaluate those and at the same time look at the sweep path analysis.
Okay, and you'll get the dimensions of the fire trucks from the fire chief? You have them, great.
We'll look at the hammerhead at that unit 1716. Okay.
Okay, we talked about the level of service and the other intersections. You're going to look at that. The trip counts, it sounds like there's not much we can do about that while the gas work's being done. So that's something, I think actually we dealt with a similar issue with one of these other projects where we, actually might have been Rockwood, where we're going to do something later, collect data at a later date, and then if it turned out...
Reevaluate and determine if we have
Yeah.
any further mitigation.
What project was that?
25 Rockwood.
Okay.
Because schools, we were waiting for school traffic
Like the
versus...
baseball games or
Yeah, it was-
something.
yeah, it was different time of the year.
Sports games at
Yeah.
the field.
Yeah. And since then, they've now installed a traffic signal there, which actually shows vehicles coming from East Boardman Street, their speed, and it sends off a signal to Rockwood Road.
Right.
Which it may actually be something they may have to do for mitigation if they can't get to those levels. They show the speed, I guess you would call it the SSD speed coming on Rockwood Road, and then you have the intersection. People will see that speed and know that there's a car approaching, and vice versa. If there's a car at the intersection, it allows the people knowing on Rockwood Road, which is the SSD speed, to know that there's a car approaching. So it may be something
Yeah,
to that.
that's one measure. Another measure that I've seen employed is the new speed feedback signs where they flash at you when you're going over the speed limit have actually, the data shows, caused 85th percentile speeds to be reduced, which would in turn change the stopping sight distance requirements. So if there are ways to mitigate the concern there. As Dan pointed out at the outset, this is the reviewing authority. We're dealing with the AASHTO manual. There is some interpretation and, some discretion, but obviously safety is paramount. So all these issues will be looked at in detail.
Any further questions from the board?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
With regards to the sidewalks, did you not take pedestrian count at all, or did you take pedestrian counts? I was just a little bit confused on that.
Our counts did not produce any pedestrian counts. So the counts were from 2016, and to be truthful, I was employed in a different office at that time, but so that the counts did not produce it, but that type of count should give you pedestrian data. We did not receive it, so it should have given us data if it was there, but that column did not have any counts for those pedestrians.
So there was no pedestrians on Seekonk Street at all?
Based on what the count gave us,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. And then, just in your expert opinion, would you say that Seekonk Street is walkable?
I think it would be an uncomfortable walk, is what I would say, an unsafe walk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Nope.
At this time, why don't we open it up to the audience? Do they have any questions with regard to the traffic study? And just if you could take the mic, state your name.
Hi, my name is Slavana Della Camera. I live at 134 Seekonk Street. And I have a couple of questions regarding the numbers used to calculate the traffic. Statistically, we're at 2 cars plus per household, and I'm kind of confused as to why only 1 car per household was used in the study. There's 96 units proposed at 144 Seekonk Street, and yet only 96 cars were accounted for. If you look at statistical data by the U.S. government, they are saying that 1.9% per household is a car. So basically 2 cars per household. So why is that? And also, in terms of the other developments currently in process, did the total amount of cars at the point of completion for all the developments be included in the study? So we have many huge developments in the process. Were those included at the point of completion, plus at the right statistical quantity? So I hope that makes sense.
That's good questions.
Would you like?
Yeah, go ahead.
Chair. So on the first one, I didn't notice anything in the peer reviews comments that would suggest that the counts that were used or the trip generation that was used for the project was not in accordance with the requirements that are usually applied. So, I think the answer to the first question is that if it's 1 car or 1 trip per unit during peak hours or whatever the trip generation that's used, I didn't see anything to suggest that that was incorrect. Did you see anything as far as the trip generation?
The trip generation numbers are from the Institute of Transportation Engineers book, and they're based on actual counts and actual developments. And what happens is a unit might have more than 1 car, probably does, but not all the trips happen during that 1 hour. Someone might leave for work at 7, someone might leave for work for 8, someone might leave for work at 9. And that's why that happens. The trips are there, they just don't happen to all happen in the peak hour.
So I think that answers the first question. The second question is what we were, as far as build conditions and all the additional development, I think that's what we were sort of kicking around as far as the stress test on increasing the overall conditions around the town as far as our counts were concerned, to account for additional development that's happened at the time. So I think the conclusion on that, Dan's action item on that, was that Kim and Philip are going to get together and see, given that Seekonk Street counts in the next several months might not be reliable because of construction, how we can take into account those build conditions and the traffic around town.
And the developments that are ongoing already. And just make sure you categorize those so we can put it to bed. Includes the enclave, includes 84 Cleveland Street, includes developments behind, I think it's Stop River's got a couple of small developments going on.
Yeah, I think Rich should be part of that conversation, since he would have the most knowledge about what other projects are ongoing, as the woman mentioned.
I'm going to let him. Anything else, Chris? Yeah, okay.
One more question, please. In terms of the study that includes the ongoing development in Norfolk, as we all know, there are similar developments in Rentham and in Franklin, and Seekonk Street is a cut-through road. It's the main drag to get from those localities to 27 and onward into Boston. So I think it would be prudent to include those developments as well in the count.
Yeah, and I think Kim, if I'm not mistaken, you have actually asked them to look at Main Street and Seekonk Street, which would be the cut-through coming from the Rentham area. Is that correct?
I've asked them to consult with town staff, the board, and consider those locations.
Okay. Sure. Lorraine, grab a mic. Kim, do you want to pass your mic back? Chris doesn't want to give his up.
Lorraine Sweeney, 14 Stop River Road. Just a request that when they do additional intersections, would it be possible to study Stop River Road, the intersection with Seekonk Street? That's a very dangerous intersection, especially between the hours of 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. That's when the middle school and high school buses stop. The traffic stops behind those buses and backs up beyond Cleveland Street in the morning. There have been numerous accidents at that location because people are leaving, coming and going to work. And the sight distance at Stop River, as you're coming from the south heading north towards Medfield, is really bad coming out of Stop River. The cars seem to pick up speed after they pass the intersection of Cleveland with Seekonk, and it's very difficult to pull out of that intersection, in the morning especially. Then just a second issue is, in the winter especially, the snow gets piled up at that intersection, and it is virtually impossible to see as these cars come barreling down. You have to bring your car out into the middle of Seekonk just to pull out in the morning. Just one other note, too, unrelated. The distance from 144 Seekonk Street to the train station is actually a little over 2 miles. I've clocked it with my Strava app because I walk my dog every day, and I've done every which way you can go. And there is no way you can get there in less than 2 miles from 144 to the train station.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren. Okay. Anybody else with questions on the traffic study to date? Anything else on board?
Yeah, one more thing. Based on like the school type of traffic, because you have now maybe 96 units here, we'll possibly have more school students coming from this property. The school bus pickup might be at the foot of this entrance. The staging for that is kind of interesting in terms of what would happen with people waiting for the bus to come. Where would people with their cars and their kids? And I wonder if the traffic studies look at that in some way, the staging of school traffic.
So I think, we'll consult with Travis, who's the lead designer, and then Philip's team just about the internal configuration and what that might look like. On other projects in town, I know you've suggested doing a little shelter towards the front of some of the developments. But I think the roadway redesign for the entrance might look at that as well, whether or not it makes sense to have a area for the bus to turn out, depending on, what the bus company ultimately decides to do. So, we'll look at how the front entrance of the site may affect it once we get into the redesign of the plans.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the width of the road itself in terms of like cars just waiting to let their kids get picked up. I could see a couple of cars, if not 10, 12, staged waiting for that. Okay, thank you.
To build on that, have you checked with, I don't know if it's the bus
Yeah,
company, or is this, am I wondering?
No, it would be, go ahead, it would be the school. You'd have to actually talk to the school.
The school as to where the desirable or the practical bus pickup point would be for the kids? Have you done that?
No, I think I'd mentioned before, sometimes it's a private bus company, but it's the school department takes care of that in Norfolk.
Yeah.
It's a private bus.
Well, it's a private bus company, but the school actually dictates, not the private bus company.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yeah.
So in other towns, it's called the bus company, and they'll tell you. So I think,
Whichever.
Right.
If you could do that, because that would make a big difference in terms of understanding what the potential impact of the morning and the afternoon, okay, especially the morning school pickup is.
Yeah. Did you get a copy of Jason Cullen's email? He had a couple of questions. Some of them we've answered already. But Amy, did you send it to?
I sent it to the board.
You want to send it to the board? Could you send that to Chris's team? That way, some of it has a little bit to do with Travis. Some of it talks about the bus.
Yeah, some of
Some of
civil.
it talks about snow. It relates to some of these things we're talking about, the hammerhead. So we'll make sure you get that as well, so we can talk about that next time as well. And I think we're going to probably, as we move forward here, as the plan develops, is going to have to look at some kind of sidewalk. I know the town has no plans for any sidewalks in that area. I know the Enclave development is going to be installing a sidewalk throughout Village Green onto Cleveland Street and then connect to Rockwood Road. So I think we're going to have to look at some, you're going to have to add those issues. Rich can probably be of some help there too, is coming out of this development, tying into, I think Cleveland Street, and I think that's going to be the closest location where an existing sidewalk will be. So I think that's something we've got to start to look at as well, because I think it's going to, obviously with the number of people and with the idea of green community and walkability to the train station, this is going to have to be part of this development. And where, I think what Kim mentioned is there areas we can, areas we can't, where are the dead spots, and try to see if we incorporate those. Anything else on traffic? Okay. We look forward, you're going to, when do you think you'll build in? Do you think you'll be getting that back? I know we're planning on the 16th still, so do you think you think in a week you can turn that around to get it to Kim, or?
so I got to talk to Travis as far as, we were going to do some basic surveying down there. We're planning to do a lot of work in the next few weeks in advance of presenting, hopefully, an updated plan set on the 16th. I don't know if that's going to include some of these SSD, ISD issues, because we'll probably have a full hearing discussing some of the civil, some of the findings that came out of the soil review, the soil testing, and then, the driveway configuration. So maybe if we could, set a goal of shortly thereafter to fully answer or get our response to the peer review comments that include answers on the SSD, ISD issues, would make sense for a schedule.
Your schedule for the 16th, the next scheduled one is the 6th of November, would be the next hearing.
Yeah, so looking at that as well, wow, it's October already, isn't it?
Yeah. Moving quick.
So, Travis, how are you looking, I mean, we're not going to have all our soil data back.
I mean, there's a potential we move you from the 16th to the 23rd. All the board members have some availability, and I don't know if Sean, you available on the 23rd? We could move you from the week of the 16th to the 23rd, so we could, and we won't have anything else scheduled that evening. We could actually do civil and some of these other items.
Right. And again, that would likely, if at all, Travis, be a presentation. So that night would be the
That'd be
first
helpful.
night you would, no, I mean, we could, that night you would be seeing the revised plan for the first time and commenting on it for the first time, or as soon as we can get it before then. But do you think there's some evolution that we can get by the 23rd?
Yeah, assuming we get all the test data back that's being conducted on site, I mean, it's not gonna be full design level to this, but I think it's something, a redesign that we could speak to without going into some of the finer details of, you know,
Yeah.
grading and specific grading.
I think that to be most productive, it would be helpful for whatever is going to be coming from the applicant, have Sean be able to review it and provide comments on it before the hearing.
Right.
I think for you to come in with these plans and for us seeing it for the first time on the night of the hearing, I don't think that's all that productive.
Yeah, I don't disagree in this context where, you know, Sean would come to the hearing and not be able to see it. So do you think we could do stopping sight distance and intersection sight distance? And is there anything else on the agenda that we could maybe address on the 23rd? Submit a plan on the 23rd without Sean here, and then Sean could, you know, submit a peer review, and then we have the hearing on the 6th?
Or we can give you the 30th. I can even give you that option if you want to.
Well, we want to give Sean some time to turn it
Yeah,
around
that's what I'm
as
saying. You
well.
tell me how much he needs. When do you think you'll be able to get Sean the plan to give him enough time? I mean, if you want to delay till the 30th, and then we have, and get Sean his plan by the 23rd, give him a week. Sean, would that be sufficient?
Yeah, I'm happy to review anything at any stage of the process, because, you know, there's going to be kind of an iterative process and a lot of different things that are playing
Yeah.
the decision-making. My big concern is, from what I hear, is there's going to be some substantive changes to the layout that I think the board's going to want to see. I'm happy to provide feedback as you're developing it, to tell you whether I think you're hitting the mark or missing the mark. My suggestion would be to take the time you have and get the best available information that you can, and make whatever decisions you can at that point in time. Rather than, my fear is if we kick it down the road and then we have substantive issues or disagreements, we're not going to have time to address them. So I prefer to see, the more information we can see, the earlier the better.
But I think it's also useful for us to have Sean's input before we have the meeting, and I think, because a lot of your plan revisions are responding to his comments. You know, if you need until the 30th, if you can get the plans prepared by the 23rd, and then we have a meeting on the 30th, that strikes me as much more
Gives you a little more
productive.
time, and we might get some more traffic.
Yeah, I guess we can have the soil testing done. Is that?
Yes, the soil test is finished tomorrow at 11 o'clock is done.
So how much time do you need to turn all this around?
Yeah, I think at a, you know, maybe more than a conceptual level, a new layout, addressing some of Sean's concerns, I think we could have that by the 23rd.
So you'll have the test pit data, and you're going to have the elevation, groundwater elevations, you're going to have the soil data,
Well-
because a lot of Sean's concerns were those kind of questions.
Yeah, so we're going to verify soils, which is a big part of what Sean had reviewed. The test pit data will be provided, and then from there, a new design addressing some of the issues that we've discussed could be presented or provided at that, you know, the 23rd.
The geohydro test is not on until the 14th of October. That's the earliest we can get Steve Smith out with the drill rig. He's not going until the 14th of October. So the drilling's happening then, but the regular deep test pits are finished tomorrow.
So it sounds like if we get the information to Sean by the 23rd, the 30th sounds like a productive meeting.
Sounds like
Is that
that's
you
the
agree?
case, yeah. And
You'll make it work, right? Good.
Just, yeah, I would expect, if I can get a written response to you ahead of that meeting, I will, for the record. But, yeah, I might just be coming to share thoughts.
Okay. All right. That work?
that sounds productive.
So this is October 30th, correct?
October 30th, okay.
Get back on.
And we will, we'll just continue it on the 16th, since we've already, okay?
Yep.
No.
You have a question in the back corner. Lorraine, can you give the microphone? Do you still have the microphone? Nope. Can Kim give Lorraine the microphone to give to Ron?
I just have one question, and that is, has anyone come up with an actual measurement of the traveled way on Seekonk Street? At any point?
The width? The
Traveled
width
way.
of the travelway? So that's actually, yep, the paved width is something that we're going to take a look at when we present the updated stopping sight distance plan. So that's some of the survey work we're going to do down there. So it's going to show the layout, the roadway layout, and the paved width of directly in front of the site entrance.
That'll include the current width, not after
Correct.
adjustments to it.
Yeah, are there planned adjustments after the gas company's
I'm
done?
not aware of any. Are you Rich McCarthy? Grab the mic.
No, at the moment, the plan is they'll do the patch, and then it's going to let it settle, and then they'll come back in afterwards. But they're going to be delaying that until all the cross connections get in there, so it's just curb to curb. So there's no
change.
No plan with.
I guess that's why I'm asking. You know, is the town going to be held to widening that road for the sake of another development? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. All right. So,
Can I actually ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
If you don't mind. I mean, has there been any discussion, Rich, about widening, or is there any discussion about improving Seekonk Street for sidewalks, complete streets application? I mean, we did the complete streets grant application for Abbeville. Has there been any thought about applying for that kind of grant for this road?
What I'll do is go back to the Seekonk Street, as you know, is we have some, the concern was the right-of-way width, layouts there to be able to put in a sidewalk, to be able to provide adequate, separation between the travel way and the sidewalk. So a little bit challenged to do the sidewalk on Seekonk Street, so there was concern, not that we wouldn't want to do it, but that we had right-of-way issues there. But I'll take a look at the plan to see there might have been some of those other gap alternatives that we will take a look at and report back to the board on.
Okay. And then just to put some dates on the calendar for follow-up on traffic, can you guys respond to the traffic issues by the 23rd as well, or? Okay.
Yes.
So I'll calendar that.
we say 30th. No, they're going to respond by the 23rd to give Kim a chance to peer review it again, and then he'll present on the 30th.
Right. And Kim, are you available in that week between those two dates to review this and respond back with comments?
Yeah. I think I get November, as I'm going through a week or two.
Okay. And are you free on the 30th in case we want to have you back?
I am 99.9% sure. I have to double check with Mr. Elton.
That's yes.
That's
That's a yes. You got a hand up.
Sure.
Karen Clark, Seekonk Street. Just one question on the right-of-ways. Can I assume that because you mentioned there right-of-way issues on Seekonk Street, that it's not the customary 10 feet in front of one's property that the town has access to its right-of-way? Is it different per house, those right-of-ways?
The right-of-way width will be, say, whatever distance that is, and then the proximity of your property would be in relation to the width. So it might vary from property to property as far as location goes. I'm not sure. Well, the other thing is, I don't know if we have survey to know if the Seekonk Street is it within the center line of the right-of-way,
Right.
or if it's, shifted
yeah.
from one side, so we don't have
Yeah.
survey.
Right, the road is not always in the center line, unfortunately.
Okay,
So
so it could vary.
Yeah.
It can vary, yeah, if it's not, the road is, there are roads, unfortunately, that are not in the center line of the right-of-way, so there is differences.
When we were looking at Lawrence Street, we found that one property, the right-of-way was actually about 40 feet into the people's property.
Yeah,
So that's how much it can vary. Yeah,
Rich, if I can add to that.
nothing like a cow path.
Just based off this existing conditions plan from Andrews, on one side of the property, it looks like the edge of that curb is very close to the property. And then you go to, 120 feet down, and it looks like maybe 4 or 5 feet, so it's just looking off this plan, it definitely varies.
Move the road.
So now we have to, we have to pick a hydrogeological peer reviewer. You folks, you've seen all the the 3 different.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we saw 3 applications. I think we left off at the last meeting, and I made a comment about whether or not we were going to get to a hydrogeo evaluation as something that was, in our opinion, final design, not knowing that, the project was going to go forward. And I think we had a meeting with the Conservation Commission last week that I thought gave us a lot of good feedback about what their mindset was relative to testing on the site. I mean, we all know that there were allegations of wetland alterations, and I think where I left off with Dan was that the zoning board, this board, had actually requested at some point that Beta, who is the peer review engineer that we're paying for to review wetland and conservation and environmental related issues, do some independent testing to evaluate whether or not there was a disturbance in the area that was referred to as Area 2 before the Conservation Commission in Mr. Garner's report. From our perspective, all of these issues are tied together. Dan suggested that I ask the board whether or not this is something that's still out there in the board's mind, or whether or not we can put this behind us and move forward. If we can put it behind us and move forward, we can certainly talk about engaging a hydrogeo expert at great expense to the applicant. But if we're still dwelling on, allegations that critical wetland resources were filled, then if those allegations are still out there, why are we spending money, doing additional hydrogeo evaluation? We thought we had put this issue behind us when we met with the board back in 2017, and the sentiment I got was, let's move forward. Little did I know it was going to end up at the Concom at the time. I think my question to the board is, where are we on that? Have we moved forward? And if we haven't, we have some opinions about how any further testing would proceed, who would be present, how it would go about. Understanding that we disagree with the premise of the testing at the outset, this Garner report and everything that brought with it. So I present the question to the board. Where do we stand on that?
I think, and I was at the Concom meeting, as you know, and the last I thought we had decided was that with the machine out there and with the folks you had out there, that we were going to have Marta tomorrow when she was out there doing starting the environmental review. They would do some soil sampling in Area 2, and you would have your expert environmental engineer there, and that this would be the last we'd be discussing this after those findings were looked at. Now, that was my understanding, that that's how we were going to proceed, was Marta was going to be out there. I think one other individual in Marta's firm was going to be out there to do Area 2 and check that. And then you would have, obviously, your experts. I think you have a couple people on site doing the soil sampling who would be present. And then if you were going to have your own expert soil sample, I don't know if I think Dr. Rockwood, he would be, someone like Dr. Rockwood would be present as well.
So the idea was David Crossman, who was our wetland scientist,
Right.
would be there. But Dan's initial email to me said that Laura from Nova Armstrong
Right.
would take the tests, and then Tetra Tech would witness them, or I guess Sarah was the soil expert, and then Sean chimed in that Sarah's not a wetland scientist. So we said, well, there should be a wetland scientist for the town there that's familiar with the site, and we had suggested Mr. Hutchinson, who did the initial peer review for the Conservation Commission, knows the site, walked by this area, never suggested the things that Mr. Garner suggested, and there was a question about whether or not he would be available.
I think the concern was because we were using Tetra Tech as our peer reviewer, it would be difficult to have him there witnessing this. That it's better that you have your expert, not because he's working for us. Obviously, Tetra Tech is working for us.
We want
Right.
an unbiased observer. We're quite happy to have two observers, both Tetra Tech and Beta. So just like
Well, Beta's going to be doing the soil sampling, so,
We also would like to have another observer that was independent, just to make sure everything was all set. I couldn't actually get a hold of Dave Crossman, so that was my concern. We just heard about this on Monday afternoon, so.
Because it was short notice there. Dan took a closer look at the plan, and it looks like the two test pits that we're planning to do are not directly in the area where Mr. Garner was doing.
Area 2.
Well, it wasn't direct, it was sort of on the fringes of Area 2. There are two deep observation test pits nearby. So, you know, I think you could probably get the machine around where.
Well, it's not going to be a machine, correct? It's not going to be a machine.
Right, no, I'm just saying, can you proceed with your testing, and then that area is going to remain that area? We're not going to move it, so whenever we can get a mutually agreeable time, it's just, we got an email on Monday afternoon. I was out of the office Monday, frantically texting from, you know, my meeting. Ted called me. He was going to do testing the following morning. Then it turned out Beta couldn't be there on Tuesday. Ted indicated, look, I'm not going to dig up the site any further. And, you know, I think the answer is it's going to remain undisturbed if we do those two sites. But if he drives on the fringes of it or whatever it is, I think if the soil testing's done with a spade properly and the information's given to this board, and again, you know, we've been fine with that all along. We invited this board to do that testing. For whatever reason, it ended up at the Concom. We always felt as though this board has jurisdiction. We have an application pending before this board, so we'd be hard-pressed to argue that if you felt there was something of substance that you wanted to investigate, that, you know, we wouldn't go to court to try to quash a warrant from this board. The only thing I would suggest, though, is that we had a settlement agreement with respect to the soil testing that occurred back in 2017. And I thought the settlement agreement said anything arising out of the allegation of road building and the stop work order and the soil testing was done as far as this board was concerned. We're still happy to have you go do the testing. All right?
good, then stop it there.
Well-
We'll do the testing,
But
if
what
he
you-
wants to drive on the fringes, let him drive on the fringes. I don't want his bucket in Area 2, and then just get a mutual date in the next week or so. I mean,
Can we do the testing tomorrow?
I think Marta's available, but you've got to get, you have to have your reviewer there.
What I'm saying is, what he's saying, what I'm saying is,
Testing done tomorrow, it's all set.
can Dave Crossman get there?
I'm happy with Dan O'Driscoll and Sarah at the witness.
Yeah, and we're not doing the machine's not doing the testing.
No.
This is a separate
So
testing.
what,
That's the.
just so for explanation of Sarah's qualifications.
Sarah's a soil evaluator. And a soil evaluator is a license that's required for conducting test pits and recording soil samples for use in hydrogeo studies, use in septic designs. Wetlands is a little bit more of a more subtle science, but it's based in the same principles. So Sarah can document what was seen at the location. She's just not going to be making the decisions as to whether it qualifies as a wetland under the various regulations, federal, state, local. She can certainly witness the work and document what was found, take pictures. In that way, the information is memorialized for anybody else to come back and look at it later.
I think that's all.
We're good for tomorrow. Dave Crossman just emailed 20 minutes ago. He's coming tomorrow. So.
Okay.
Okay.
And that way, this board has the information they need, and we put this Area 2 to bed.
Can I proceed with the deep testing? Can I proceed with the deep testing if the results are favorable tomorrow? Because the
Hold on,
machine.
hold on. You can proceed with the deep testing at the two areas that were identified on your plan, which are, it's not Area 2. There's one that's
There's one
down
area.
gradient. It's not right in Area 2.
It's 15 feet from it, and it's a 50,000-pound machine.
Can you get it from,
You're not going to,
We looked at all the test pit locations. They were marked in the field when we did our site walk.
Right.
In the execution of that work, you shouldn't do anything to disturb the area that we're talking about. I mean, the machine will potentially track over that area, but it's already been filled. It's not going
Yeah.
to change anything.
That's not an issue with tracking over the area, it's the actual digging.
Do we have a time for the morning for the testing?
It's 11.
11?
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Do we need Kim anymore?
No, he actually, thank you very
Kim,
much. We
thank
don't
you.
need Phil either. If you want to leave, you're dismissed as well, Phil. You guys both did a great job.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
All right.
See you again.
So we're all set, we're confirmed for tomorrow at 11. The issue with your test put, I mean, if you can stay away from Area 2, that's ideal. I think Laura is going to probably be able to say on site, I don't think she has to take stuff back to the office. I think she's going to be able to tell.
Mr. Gardner couldn't.
I don't know.
We'll see. Let's let them do their work.
So she might be able to tell you on site, I don't see anything here, you're safe.
So there's possibly a resolution tomorrow.
Right.
We'll wait to see, but let's get it done, right? All right. With that being said, do you want us to, can we pick a peer reviewer tonight for the hydro-geo study?
At the chair's pleasure. We did review the resumes. I had indicated last time around that we had a preference for Tetra Tech just because there definitely are synergies there. I think we've shown a lot of goodwill as far as appearing at the Concom hearing, talking about this testing that's going to happen. We feel as though it would save us some time and money, and it would probably be more productive as well to have it all under one roof. So we've looked at the three. We prefer Tetra Tech out of the three of them since we already have Tetra Tech doing the civil on this. They're more than qualified, and we think that would make sense.
And our concern was obviously he was $7,000 higher than Novice.
Mr. Garner was $2,000 or half the price of the other expert, and we saw what that cost the town. So happy to pay more for responsible, quality work.
Thank you for letting me.
I always tell you, call me ahead of time, but you never do. No. All right, so your preference would be Tetra Tech. Okay. Has everybody on the board had a chance to look at the proposals? Don't come back and say I'm costing you extra money. Is that fine with Tetra Tech?
Yeah, I was looking at especially the,
I think
yeah,
Tetra Tech
yeah,
makes
I agree.
All right.
Photo lineament, is that the word?
Sean, do you want to help him out here?
Oh, okay.
Dan's words, but it isn't geographic.
Dan, anything on your part? Or?
No, I think all three firms are qualified. I've personally not worked with Mr. Dillon, but I agree that there is a benefit to having under the same roof. Obviously, Sean will be involved to some extent in the hydro study. With respect to cost, I kind of viewed all the costs as somewhat equivalent because it's hard to say at this stage what is going to be required of these folks. We saw that with Abbeville. There's meetings, there's additional scope, additional work is added to their scope. So really what's important is their hourly rates, and they're all fairly equivalent from what I can tell, and so I would be comfortable with any of the firms.
There's only one guy. There's some guy, Sean Reardon. He gets a lot of money, huh? So I have a motion to accept Tetra Tech for the hydrogeological study proposal dated September 18, 2019, with a budgeted amount of $16,345.
So moved.
Second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, while we're on that topic, so now I think I heard Mr. O'Hart say that you've got Stephen Smith. You're gonna retain him to be your expert.
He's been on site. He was there on the first day of testing Tuesday morning. He was there
Okay.
for 3 hours.
So, just in terms of next steps and timing, are you expecting him to prepare a report that would be then submitted to the zoning board?
Yes.
Do you have any idea of how long that would take?
Well, he's doing actual deep core drilling on 14th to the 16th of October. He said about 5 to 7 days after that he'll have a report.
Like that tough? Okay. So we might actually get that report in time for the meeting on the 30th, and then we can ship that off to Tetra Tech and schedule a meeting after that point for a discussion on this. Okay.
I mean, right now, we don't have November, we don't have a meeting because we have town meeting on the 19th, which would, the 20th, we usually leave open in case town meeting goes to the second night. We do have one on the 6th, which we can discuss as we get closer here to see if we'll leave sort of open.
And where are we on the time frame here with the 180-day clock? Are we?
Amy,
do you have that?
I'm not worried because Chris is told that he will not utilize that if we're moving forward.
No more
I
funny
heard
business.
it from him. I watched the meeting. And I know he's a man of his word, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. You know where
And
we
never
are,
loses
Do you know
those
where we are,
cases,
Amy?
right?
Deadline to complete the hearing, I have January 2nd. 2020. The open hearing on June 5th.
We had granted two extensions, Amy?
So I haven't updated this. What are the extensions?
We're to February now. Yeah.
Okay, I just have my 40Bs mixed up. So you're through, this is the one that's through February 1st?
Yes, I believe
Okay.
so.
That's been extended.
Okay.
All right. So right now, we'll continue the 16th, and at that time, we'll obviously continue till the 30th, okay? For the civil engineering and for, if we have the traffic, even better, and we might have some other information, okay? Yes, Sean?
Just for coverage, it's all right, the board's all right if I work directly with Travis?
We encourage it.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you on the 30th, but I'm sure we'll be talking in between.
Great, thank you.
Motion, we actually have a motion to continue the public hearing till the 16th of October for the Lakeville. We've already done that, haven't we? So
No.
But we have to do it again here, so yeah, till the 16th of
Did we
October.
just continue this one?
We haven't continued this one.
No, we're about to continue this one.
Okay.
Do we
To
need-
the 30th.
Yeah, do we,
Well,
need-
we have a meeting already scheduled on the 16th.
We don't actually, we talked about.
Oh, we didn't do it? Oh, we didn't?
Vote on
yeah,
it.
so
Okay, so we'll just continue it to the 30th. That's great.
I wanted to say one thing quickly. The other two experts for hydrology, I made a comment earlier about just...
Was it an offhanded
It
comment?
was an offhanded comment about experts. I just want to say the other...
You made an offhanded comment about an expert?
Yes.
I just find
The
this
other two experts
hard to believe.
qualified. We didn't have anything against those experts. We just
Yes.
preferred Tetra Tech. I didn't want
It's
to
a-
suggest they were in the same
No.
bucket as others that,
We
went
understand.
up against, so just to...
We understand, Chris. Thank you. Could I get a motion to continue the public hearing for Lakeville till the 30th of October at 7 PM?
so moved.
Second.
Lakeland Hills.
Lakeland Hills, right? It's
Lakeland, yeah. What did I say? Lakeland Hills.
Lakeland Hills.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you on the 30th. Thank you. Do I have we have no minutes to review, so do I have a motion to close the public hearing at 9 o'clock for the zoning board of appeals meeting on October 2nd?
Make a motion to close the hearing.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you, Chris.
This,